There are names whispered across the stars that chill even the most hardened veterans of the Imperium, words that hang in the air like the smell of dried blood and promethium fumes. Among them, none are uttered with such dread, such reluctant awe, as the name of the 12 Legion, the World Eaters. Once, they were the Emperor's executioners, his wolves of iron and flesh, unleashed to bring swift annihilation to those who defied the dream of unity. Now, they are little more than echoes of rage, hollow husks consumed by their own appetite for slaughter, their once glorious banners reduced to rags stained with the lifeblood of a million worlds. But buried beneath the gore, beneath the ironclad madness and the ritualized butchery, lies something else. A secret history written in red, a truth so grotesque that even demons avert their gaze. It began on a world where mercy was considered a weakness, and pain was a currency traded daily in flesh. It began with a boy who was carved into a weapon before he could understand what it meant to be human. From those beginnings, the seed of the 12 Legion was sown, and from that seed would bloom one of the most terrible legacies in the history of mankind. Their fall was not sudden, nor was it the result of a single betrayal. It was a slow, deliberate descent, one cut at a time, one scream at a time, until all that was left was the pounding of hearts and the ecstasy of bloodshed. They were meant to be the Emperor's blades. Instead, they became the echoes of his failure. If you dare to follow that crimson trail, if you wish to understand why the World Eaters became the embodiment of mankind's darkest hunger, then steel your soul and do not look away. For what follows is not legend nor prophecy, but the unvarnished truth behind the rage that reshaped the stars. Only the bold delve into such forbidden histories. If this story grips your soul and you wish to walk further down these bloodied corridors of imperial truth, then lend your strength to this chronicle. Let your voice be heard. Subscribe, share, and join the ranks of those who still remember what the Imperium dares not speak aloud. Your loyalty ensures that the echoes of these forgotten legions are not silenced by time or fear. The skies above Nuceria burned the color of old rust, heavy with the taste of iron and dust. Wind swept across the mountains, carrying the echoes of screams from the gladiatorial pits, a music that never ended. Down there, beneath the crumbling spires of a civilization that had long forgotten mercy, men and women fought to survive not for glory, but because death was the only release that the masters denied them. The air reeked of blood and oil. The scent of promethium lamps mingled with the copper sting of spilled life. Beneath those choking fumes, a child was learning the first lesson of his existence. Pain was truth. He had no name in those early years, only a number carved into his skin and a collar that sang with electricity. They called him the Red One because he bled more than most, and yet did not fall. Every lash, every cut became a prayer whispered into his bones, and though his body failed him 1,000 times, something inside refused to die. When he looked up through the lattice of the cage, he could see the pale sun struggling to pierce the smoke, and he wondered if it too was a slave, chained by the horizon, forever rising only to fall again. The thought did not comfort him, but it stayed. Even then, something in him understood what it meant to be trapped by something greater than oneself. The overseers loved him for the way he fought. They said his fury was beautiful, a savage artistry that made the crowd roar. In the arenas of Nuceria, spectacle was survival, and this nameless boy became the unwilling star. He learned to move with the rhythm of violence, to anticipate the pulse of the crowd as if it were a second heartbeat. They implanted crude stimulants into his skull, primitive, barbaric things that stung his nerves and sharpened his aggression. With each new modification, he felt the line between man and weapon blur further, until he no longer knew which side of the chain he belonged to. Years passed. The child became a youth, the youth a killer. His name, when it finally came, was whispered first by another slave, Angron. The sound of it seemed foreign to him, soft in a world that knew only harshness. Yet the name endured, and with it, the faint spark of identity that the masters could not crush. He led rebellions within the pits, small, doomed uprisings that ended in fire and bone. But in each defeat his legend grew. The crowds no longer cheered only for his victories. They feared his defiance. They saw something in him that even the guards did not, a storm waiting to break its chains. Then came the day when the masters of Nuceria sought to remind their slaves who held power. They brought forth 100 men, the strongest of the pit fighters, and forced them to kill one another until only one remained. Angron stood among them, breathing dust and blood, his mind hollowed out by fatigue and rage. He fought for hours, his hands slick, his voice raw from roaring. When it was done, he was the last one standing, but he did not kneel when ordered to. He spat blood at his captors and declared, in a voice like grinding iron, that no man could own him again. The punishment was swift and cruel. They pinned him to the operating slab and brought the surgeons, artisans of pain, whose skill was not in healing but in remaking flesh. There, under the glare of white light, they cut open his skull and set in place the first of the butcher's nails. Metal hooks and neural chains burrowed into his brain, turning agony into ecstasy, feeding on every flicker of rage like parasites drunk on fire. When he awoke, the world was gone. In its place was rhythm, a pulse that beat behind his eyes, demanding blood. The nails whispered to him without words, urging him to strike, to tear, to kill until the noise in his head found peace. But peace never came, only the need. He escaped soon after, leading thousands of slaves in revolt against their masters. They called themselves the Eaters of the World, for they would consume everything that had once consumed them. The mountains shook with their fury, and the streets of the cities ran red. For the first time, Angron was free, and yet, freedom felt like another cage. The nails never quieted. They screamed louder with every victory. The slaves who followed him began to fear his rages, for when the voices grew too loud, he would turn on them as well. He could not stop. He could not rest. The pain was the only language his body understood. In those days, he dreamed of a figure made of light, a being who looked upon him with pity and called him son. But in every dream, the figure's hand reached toward him, and the nails howled in protest, drowning all thought in red. He would awaken from these visions shaking, his hands stained with blood he did not remember shedding. The revolt dragged on for months, the mountains echoing with the thunder of war. For a moment, it seemed as though Nuceria might finally fall, until the sky itself split open. The Emperor came in his ship of gold and shadow, descending upon the battlefield like a storm given form. To those who saw him, he was salvation incarnate, radiant, terrible, and utterly inhuman. But to Angron, who stood knee-deep in the corpses of those he had freed, the sight of this being filled him not with awe but fury. For where was this God when the nails were hammered into his skull? Where was this Savior when his brothers and sisters died screaming for mercy that never came? The Emperor spoke of destiny, of brotherhood, of a future among the stars. He promised Angron command of a legion, 1,000 sons bred for war and obedience. But Angron heard only the hollow music of the nails. He refused. He would not abandon his army, his kin. They had bled with him, suffered with him. He would not trade their lives for the gilded lies of a distant god. The Emperor did not ask twice. His will was law, and in an instant the world changed. Angron found himself torn from the battlefield, ripped away from his dying army in a blaze of psychic fire. One moment he stood among his warriors, and the next, he was aboard the Emperor's ship, staring at the pale walls and the silence that followed. Below him, on the surface of Nuceria, his army fought and died alone. The masters unleashed their vengeance. The rebellion was extinguished, every rebel slaughtered, their bodies left to rot in the sun. Angron watched it all from orbit, his fists shattering the walls of his chamber as the nails sang their song of grief and fury. He was free no longer. He was stolen. And in that theft, the seed of hatred was planted deep, a hatred that would one day drown the stars themselves. The days that followed were silence, the kind of silence that gnaws at thought until it becomes a wound. Aboard the Emperor's vessel, Angron stalked like a caged beast, his every breath thick with restrained violence. The custodians who guarded him watched from a distance, their golden masks impassive, hands never straying far from their weapons. They had seen monsters before, but not one like this, a creature who bore the shape of a man and the fury of a god betrayed. The nails sang louder in his head within those sterile walls, their rhythm no longer softened by the cries of battle. They demanded the roar of combat, the scent of blood. Without it, they clawed at his mind until he could taste copper and madness on his tongue. The Emperor came to him only once more in that time, his presence filling the chamber like the weight of an ocean. There were no words of comfort, no apology for the loss that had shattered Angron's soul. Instead, the master of mankind spoke of duty. He spoke of the Great Crusade, the dream of unity, the destiny of the suns he had scattered across the stars. Angron was to command the 12 Legion, to take his place among his brothers and bring the Emperor's light to a galaxy drowning in shadow. But the light meant nothing to a man who had lived his entire life in the dark. When Angron answered, his voice was not a shout but a whisper thick with venom. He asked the Emperor if unity required chains. He asked if mercy was ever more than a lie told by the powerful to those they broke. The Emperor, patient yet implacable, merely told him that his rage would find purpose. The words echoed in the chamber long after he had gone, empty of comfort, full of command. When the ship descended upon the world where the 12 Legion waited, Angron refused to step forward. The nails pounded in protest, an iron chorus drowning out the Emperor's promises. Yet when he finally beheld his sons, the legionaries who bore his gene seed, something in him stilled. They knelt before him in perfect discipline, their armor gleaming white and cobalt beneath the ship's hangar lights. They looked upon him with awe, reverence, and unbroken loyalty. For a fleeting heartbeat, Angron felt a pang of recognition. These were his people now, he was told, his true brothers, his children of war. But when he spoke to them, when he saw the fear flicker in their eyes at his voice, he knew the truth. They were not his kin. They were soldiers bred to obey, not to bleed beside him as equals. His first act as their father was not of guidance but of rage. He struck down the closest officer, splitting helm and skull in one motion. The custodians intervened, and for a moment, the hangar trembled with the tension of impending slaughter. Yet even they hesitated, for Angron was no mere man. He was a primarch, and his fury was the stuff of nightmares. The Emperor's orders restrained them, and so the uneasy peace began. The father who hated his children, and the legion who worshipped the man who could never love them back. In the months that followed, Angron led his legion into battle, and his genius for slaughter was unmatched. Worlds fell beneath the chain axes of the 12, their oceans boiling with blood. But there was no strategy, no art of war, only rage. He threw his sons at every wall, every fortress, every enemy line until nothing stood but ruin. The Imperial remembrancers who chronicled those campaigns could not decide whether to call him hero or butcher, so they settled on both. Under his command, the Legion shed its old name, the Warhounds, and took a new one, the World Eaters. The name was fitting, yet the more they fought, the louder the nails sang. Their echo could be felt even through the gene lines, infecting the Legion itself with a reflection of their Primarch's torment. His apothecaries studied the neural lattice embedded in his skull, horrified by what they found. They called it a fusion of cruelty and brilliance, an atrocity born of alien science. But Angron would not let them remove it. He claimed it was part of him now, his strength, his curse, his truth. And in time, he demanded that every warrior under his command share in his suffering. At first, the implantation of the nails into his legionaries was forbidden by imperial decree. But the World Eaters were far from Terra, and the chain of command was fragile in the endless dark between stars. Apothecaries loyal to Angron began their secret work, carving into the skulls of their brothers, feeding wires and hooks into living minds. Those who survived emerged changed, their laughter manic, their eyes burning with the same fever that consumed their father. The more nails were implanted, the faster the Legion won its wars. Efficiency through agony, obedience through rage. The Emperor's will was clear, but his gaze was elsewhere, and the 12 Legions' transformation went unchallenged for too long. By the time his envoys arrived to enforce his command, it was already too late. Entire cohorts of world eaters were bound to the rhythm of the nails. They spoke little, dreamed less, and lived only for battle. And at their head strode Angron, the Red Angel, his chain axe dripping and his face an expression of something far beyond joy or hate. It was hunger. Still, there were moments, rare and fleeting, when the storm broke. In the aftermath of victory, when the screams faded and the nails quieted for a heartbeat, Angron would stare at the stars in silence. His warriors said that in those moments, their father looked lost, as if searching for something long buried. Some whispered that he still heard the voices of his fallen rebels from Nuceria, the cries of the brothers and sisters he had been forced to abandon. Perhaps he did. Or perhaps the nails were mocking him with ghosts he could never save. As the Great Crusade marched onward, the name of the World Eaters spread like a curse. Some worlds surrendered at the mere sight of their crimson helms. Others fought to the last, for they knew mercy would not come. Within the Imperium, whispers grew, rumors that the Emperor's son had gone too far, that his legion was a blight upon the very unity it claimed to enforce. But still, the battles raged on, and Angron's fury burned brighter with each conquest. Every victory was another step toward oblivion. Every drop of blood spilled was a prayer to a god he did not yet know existed. And though he could not name it, deep in the hollows of his mind, something vast was listening. The Great Crusade was a tide of iron and fire that swept across the stars, and at its crest rode the 12 Legion, the World Eaters, the Emperor's executioners, the storm that never stopped screaming. Wherever they descended, resistance crumbled beneath the grinding teeth of chain axes and the thunder of bolter fire. Their ships struck like meteors, disgorging crimson-clad warriors whose only prayer was the battle cry that shattered worlds. Blood for victory. Blood for the Legion. But beneath the thunder of conquest, there was no order, only hunger. The World Eaters did not wage war as their brothers did. They did not seek compliance through diplomacy or strategy. They sought annihilation. When Angron gave the order to attack, the skies turned red before the first shell fell. His fleet would bombard until the surface melted, and then, when the screams had reached a fever pitch, he would lead the assault himself, descending through the fire to walk among the corpses. They said he never removed his helm during battle, that the only glimpse of his true face came in reflections upon the blood-slick armor of his foes. The nails pulsed within him, driving each movement, each swing of his chain axe. It was said that in the thick of combat, his laughter, harsh, metallic, animal, could be heard even through the din of artillery. To fight beside Angron was to stand in the heart of a storm that cared for nothing but the next heartbeat, the next drop of blood spilled. To fight against him was to vanish from history. The Emperor's vision had been one of unity, but under Angron, the 12 Legions' unity was born of shared agony. The nails linked them together in invisible chains, synchronizing their fury, turning squads into living storms of violence that fed on one another's rage. Apothecaries recorded the phenomenon in horror, noting that when one warrior fell, those nearby became exponentially more savage. It was as if their Primarch's torment had been woven into their very flesh. The other legions began to speak of them in whispers. The Imperial fists called them feral dogs. The Ultramarines dismissed them as a necessary evil. Even the Night Lords, murderers and sadists in their own right, watched them with unease. Yet none could deny their efficiency. The 12 delivered victory after victory, though each triumph came drenched in needless death. To the bureaucrats of Terra, results mattered more than reason. And so the blood continued to flow. On the world of XII, the World Eaters were ordered to bring a rebellious city-state to compliance. The siege lasted less than a day. The moment the gates fell, Angron's warriors swept through the streets like wildfire. Civilians, soldiers, and prisoners alike were butchered without distinction. The surviving astropaths who sent their pleas for mercy back to Terra described the attack as a howling tempest of red. By the time the Vox signals fell silent, the entire continent was little more than ash and ruin. When the news reached the Imperial Palace, the Emperor did not speak of it publicly. But within the quiet halls of the Sigillite's chamber, Malcador himself is said to have remarked, "He was broken before he was found." and none present dared to disagree. To Angron, the Great Crusade was not a campaign. It was a chain of betrayals. Each world conquered was another wound, another reminder of the comrades left to die on Nuceria. His sons followed him into that madness because they believed there was meaning in his rage. But the truth was crueler. For all their victories, Angron never stopped hearing the whispers of the nails, never stopped seeing the faces of the dead when he closed his eyes. Some of his captains tried to reach him, men like Khorne, whose brilliance burned even beneath the nails' corruption. Khorne understood his father's pain better than any other. He spoke to Angron not as a subordinate but as a son trying to lead his father back from the brink. Yet his words were drowned out by the rhythm of violence. There were moments, rare, fragile instants in the aftermath of battle, when Angron would listen. His gaze would soften, the roar in his head dimming just enough for reason to surface. But it never lasted. The nails always found him again, whispering promises of peace through slaughter. Still, Khorne did not abandon him. He believed, perhaps foolishly, that Angron could still be saved, that the Emperor's dream was not yet lost. And so he fought harder than any, carving his way through enemies and allies alike if it meant keeping his father alive another day. The World Eaters began to change, subtly at first. Their war cries grew louder, their discipline weaker. Whole companies went missing after battle, their voxlinks silent, their ship holds found later filled with corpses arranged in obscene displays. Some claimed they were conducting blood rites. Others said it was the madness of the nails made manifest. When the reports reached Terra, the Mechanicum demanded an inquiry. But Angron ignored their summons. His legion was his own. He would not bow to those who spoke of control while knowing nothing of pain. The Emperor's sons were many, and pride ran through their blood like fire. When Angron refused to answer the Council of Nicaea's censure, it was not out of rebellion, but because he could not understand the language of restraint. His legion existed to fight. Without war, they were nothing but hollow shells filled with screaming metal. It was during this time that the name Butcher's Nails spread beyond the World Eaters, whispered as both curse and prophecy. Some believed the devices were relics of an ancient Xenos race, remnants of a civilization that had worshipped pain as divinity. Others said they were a human invention, a dark experiment in obedience gone terribly right. Whatever their origin, their effect was undeniable. The 12 Legion no longer fought for victory, but for the act of killing itself. And so the question began to rise among the Emperor's other sons. How long could such madness serve the dream of unity before it devoured it entirely? The answer would come, as all things do in the grim annals of mankind, with betrayal. There are many records of the Great Crusade that sing of triumphs and banners raised in victory, of worlds brought into the Emperor's light and legions hailed as heroes. The chronicles of the World Eaters are not among them. Their pages are soaked in blood and ash. Their victories measured not in conquered cities, but in the number of corpses left cooling beneath alien suns. They did not build empires. They erased them. And behind every campaign report, behind every neatly sealed data slate of compliance achieved, lay horrors that no Imperial remembrancer dared record. On the world of Aragata, the 12 Legion was sent to pacify a population that had risen in revolt against the Imperium's tithe. It was meant to be a simple suppression, a matter of days. But when the World Eaters landed, they made no distinction between rebel and loyalist. Angron himself led the assault, his chain-axe Gorefather screaming with each swing, his laughter echoing through the Vox. Entire hives vanished in the span of hours, their populations obliterated under orbital bombardment. The air became unbreathable, the soil a slurry of bone and promethium. When the killing finally stopped, there was no one left to record who had been guilty. For a time, the Emperor's bureaucrats attempted to justify such atrocities. They said it was necessary, that fear was the surest path to compliance. But even among the High Lords, the truth began to fester. The World Eaters were not the Emperor's executioners anymore. They were a weapon that had slipped its leash. The turning point came during the cleansing of Genna's reach. The rebellion there was small, almost insignificant, yet Angron ordered the annihilation of the entire planetary system. When the word reached other primarchs, there was outrage. Rogel Dorn spoke of madness. Guilliman spoke of dishonor. Even Horus, ever the diplomat, warned the emperor that his red sun was beyond control. But the emperor remained silent, as though unwilling or unable to face what his intervention on Nuceria had truly created. Angron's rage had become a contagion. Those who served under him too long found themselves changing, their tempers shortening, their dreams consumed by the rhythm of the nails. The apothecarian reported growing instability in the Legion's gene seed. Whole cohorts were recalled to Mars for testing, yet few ever returned. It was as though the nails themselves had begun to rewrite their biology, turning them from soldiers into something else entirely. Khorne was among the first to notice. He saw the dull gleam in his brother's eyes after battle, the way they lingered over the dead as though waiting for something only they could hear. He felt it in himself as well, the creeping numbness between the pulses of rage, the silence that followed slaughter, and the sense of emptiness that no victory could fill. In his moments of clarity, he tried to remind the Legion what they once were: warriors of the Emperor, sons of humanity's greatest hope. But hope had no voice in the 12 Legion anymore. The nails had devoured it. There is an account, half rumor, half heresy, of a moment when Angron spoke alone to Khorne in the aftermath of a massacre. It is said the Red Angel's voice trembled as he confessed that he no longer remembered the faces of his rebels on Nuceria, that when he closed his eyes, all he saw were flashes of red. All he heard was the rhythm that would not stop. Khorne, ever the loyal son, told him that he could still be free, that together they could silence the nails. Angron's laughter then was not cruel but weary, the sound of a man who had long since forgotten what silence felt like. And so the 12 Legion continued to burn its way across the galaxy. Planets fell, billions died, and still the Emperor did not intervene. Some whispered that he no longer could, that to confront Angron would mean acknowledging that one of his divine creations had been broken beyond repair. Others claimed he waited for Angron's own realization, that redemption had to come from within. But redemption was a concept alien to the World Eaters. They had been stripped of it piece by piece, until all that remained was the ritual of slaughter. Still, not all within the Imperium turned their gaze away. The Wolves of Russ watched closely, dispatched by the Emperor himself to shadow the Red Angel's campaigns. Leman Russ did not confront his brother, for even his warriors feared what might happen if the two primarchs clashed. But in his private communiques, Russ described Angron as a creature of sorrow chained to fury, a being more tragic than hateful. It was a rare moment of pity from the Wolf King, and a silent acknowledgement that beneath the monstrosity, something human still endured. But pity would not save the 12 Legion. The currents of fate were already shifting, the first tremors of the coming cataclysm rippling through the stars. Whispers of rebellion began to spread among the legions. Horus, the War Master, had begun to question the Emperor's vision. Doubt turned to anger, anger to ambition. And in that storm of deception and pride, Horus found allies, brothers who nursed old wounds, who saw in his words the promise of freedom from their father's cold tyranny. When Horus reached out to Angron, it was not with flattery, but understanding. He did not speak of destiny or unity. He spoke of rage, of betrayal, of the pain that the Emperor had wrought by saving Angron from the only family he had ever known. He told him that the Great Crusade was a lie, that the Emperor had never seen his sons as equals, only as tools. And in those words, Angron heard the truth he had always felt but never dared name. There was no persuasion, no oath of loyalty, no ceremony of corruption. When Horus called for rebellion, Angron simply nodded and said, "At last." In that moment the Great Crusade died. The galaxy would soon drown in the blood of brotherhood. It began as a whisper in the cortex, a vibration too faint to name, too deep to escape. The butcher's nails. To some, they were the most infamous invention in the annals of the Imperium's history. To others, they were a curse so ancient that even the Mechanicum could not trace its origin. But to the 12 Legion, they were both a gift and a damnation, the heartbeat that drove them to glory, and the chain that dragged them into oblivion. The origins of the nails remain shrouded in ruin and myth. On Nuceria, they were instruments of control, crude cortical implants used by the planet's masters to enslave their gladiators. They silenced fear, erased hesitation, and replaced thought with a constant, thrumming need for violence. When Angron was taken from the blood pits, his skull was already riddled with these archaic devices, bonded so deeply to his nervous system that even the most skilled magi of the Mechanicum dared not remove them. They pulsed with a rhythm beyond understanding, part mechanical, part psychic, feeding on pain, amplifying rage, devouring serenity. When the Emperor found him, Angron was moments from leading a hopeless rebellion. Thousands of gladiators had risen with him, their chains broken, their freedom a fleeting miracle. The Emperor chose to save only one. In an instant of golden light, Angron was torn from the battlefield and transported to the flagship Conqueror, leaving his brothers and sisters to die beneath the planet's skies. That act, meant as salvation, became his greatest wound. The nails howled in fury at the loss, and that sound would never cease. The Emperor's physicians tried to understand the devices. They mapped Angron's neural pathways, dissected captured corpses, even prayed to the Omnicia for guidance. But the nails were beyond replication, beyond control. When the Emperor himself examined them, he reportedly turned away in silence, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Some have whispered that the nails were not born of mortal hands, that their architecture bore traces of a technology far older than humanity itself. Others say that the Emperor saw in them a reflection of his own creations, a mirror of the psychic discipline he sought to impose upon mankind, but twisted and corrupted. Whatever the truth, he refused to remove them. And so the nails remained, gnawing at Angron's sanity. They demanded blood to still their rhythm, suffering to feed their hunger. Each moment without violence was agony. He could no longer think without pain. Peace became a torment. The nails had reshaped his very identity, not as a leader, not as a son, but as a weapon that could never rest. His legion soon followed. The first attempts to replicate the nails were acts of misguided devotion. Apothecaries and techmarines, desperate to bridge the gap between their primarch and themselves, began implanting crude analogues of the devices into their own skulls. The early subjects died screaming. Those who survived emerged changed, their pupils dilated, their skin flushed with fever, their speech reduced to growls and laughter. Yet, despite the horror, more volunteers came forward. They believed the pain brought them closer to their father. They believed the madness was proof of loyalty. And Angron, broken as he was, did not stop them. The transformation of the 12 Legion accelerated. Once known as the Warhounds, disciplined shock troops, loyal and fierce, they became the World Eaters, an army of berserkers whose rage could not be contained. The nails rewired them to find pleasure in agony, to feel euphoria in slaughter. Even their physiology began to shift. Their hearts beat faster, their adrenal glands swelled. Their capacity for endurance reached levels unseen in any other legion. But their minds began to unravel. It was said that to be among them in battle was to stand inside a storm. The air trembled with the hum of chain axes. The crash of bolter fire drowned beneath guttural howls. They did not march. They charged. They did not speak. They screamed. Vox channels became indecipherable. A chaos of laughter, prayers, and madness. Even the enemy often broke before the first blow, driven to despair by the sight of men who no longer feared death. Khorne remained their anchor as long as he could. He fought beside his father, not out of worship but duty, hoping that by standing near the abyss, he could keep it from spreading further. But each campaign pushed him closer to the same edge. The nails whispered to him too, and though his were less potent, their influence grew with every victory. He began to feel that same thrill when the killing started, that same emptiness when it ended. He tried to resist, but resistance was like trying to breathe underwater. The Mechanicum watched with a mix of fascination and horror. Some saw the nails as a glimpse into forbidden technologies, an opportunity to understand the mechanics of emotion itself. Others saw only heresy, a violation of the Omnicia's order, a corruption that defied logic. Mugos Archon land, in one of his final correspondences before vanishing into the unknown, wrote that the nails are not implants at all, but parasites of the soul. That line was quickly suppressed by the Mechanicum, stricken from official records, but copies survived, whispered from forge to forge, heresy disguised as curiosity. The Legion's descent into madness was not sudden, but it was inevitable. Each new implantation pushed them further from humanity, until they ceased to recognize the difference between brother and foe. Entire companies would erupt into violence without cause, their battlefields becoming fratricidal maelstrom of red mist and broken ceramite. Still, their record of victory remained unmatched. The Imperium tolerated their savagery because it was useful. They were unleashed upon the most stubborn foes, their presence alone enough to break rebellion and hope alike. But there was a moment, brief, almost forgotten, when it might have been stopped. A handful of senior officers, led by a warrior named De Cruz, proposed purging the nails entirely. They planned to sabotage the apothecary's forges and destroy every prototype. For their trouble, they were torn apart by their own brothers, their remains displayed in the mess halls as a warning. After that, there was no more talk of restraint. The Legion had chosen its path. By the time Horus called upon them, they were no longer soldiers. They were a storm given form, beautiful and terrible, without reason or remorse. And when the War Master's words reached Angron, the nails sang louder than ever before. He listened, not with his ears, but with the rhythm in his skull, the ancient pulse of hate that had become his heart. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The Red Angel was about to be born. There are those who say that the heresy began not with words, but with a sound, a low, rhythmic pounding echoing from the depths of the 12 Legion's fleet. It began as a pulse in the walls of their ships, a vibration felt through ceramite boots and armored ribs, growing louder as they drew closer to Horus's rebellion. It was not a heartbeat. It was the rhythm of the butcher's nails, multiplied across thousands of skulls, resonating through the metal bones of the conqueror. The ship became a temple of agony, its decks slick with machine oil and blood, its corridors echoing with hymns that were half war chant, half scream. Servitors scuttled through the smoke, carrying bodies to the incinerators, their synthetic minds too simple to comprehend the horror around them. Apothecaries worked without rest, drilling, implanting, sealing. The nails spread like infection, each new subject waking with a cry that shook the decks, each old veteran demanding a stronger surge, a deeper bite. The line between machine and man began to blur, until even the tech marines could no longer tell where flesh ended and metal began. Among the din, Khorne walked in silence. His armor, once adorned with the sigils of the warhounds, was now painted red from shoulder to greave, the color of blood long dried. His eyes, once bright with conviction, had dimmed. He had stopped sleeping, not that it mattered. The nails allowed no rest. Every moment was filled with static, with whispers of violence. When he closed his eyes, he saw nothing but the faces of the dead. He found Angron in the Hall of Blades, a vast chamber filled with weapons seized from every world they had conquered. The Red Angel sat upon a throne of iron, his head bowed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The nails were screaming again. Every beat of his twin hearts drove a spike of pain through his skull. Around him, the air shimmered with psychic heat, the shadows trembling as if afraid to touch him. "Father," Khorne said softly. Angron did not look up. "Do you hear them too?" he murmured, his voice like gravel dragged across steel. Khorne hesitated. "I hear only the Legion." Angron's laughter was hollow. "Then you are deaf." He lifted his gaze at last, and Khorne felt a chill run through his gene-forged blood. There was nothing human in those eyes anymore. They burned with a light that was not fire but fury, an energy so raw it seemed to devour the air around him. "They call to me, Khorne. The nails sing. They want more. They will never stop," Khorne replied. "You know that." Angron stood, his massive frame casting the room into shadow. "Then let them have everything." Those words sealed the fate of the 12 Legion. When the War Master's summons came, when Horus declared war upon the Emperor, there was no hesitation. Angron led his fleet to the Isstvan system, his engines burning brighter than any star. The nails screamed their approval. Every warrior aboard the Conqueror felt it, the sense of release, the uncoiling of a wound too long contained. They believed that by turning against the Imperium, they might finally silence the pain. They were wrong. The drop site massacre was not a battle. It was slaughter perfected. The Loyalist legions, the Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard, descended upon the black sands of Isstvan V believing they would end the rebellion. Instead, they were met with betrayal from every side. When Angron and his sons fell upon them, the ground itself seemed to shake. The nails roared in chorus, feeding on the psychic agony of betrayal. The World Eaters tore through the Loyalists like a storm of blades. There was no strategy, no formation, no mercy. Khorne led the charge, his chain-axe Gorechild cutting a path through the wreckage. He killed without thought, without pleasure, without even hate, only to still the screaming in his head. The air was thick with smoke and the copper tang of blood. Bolter shells detonated like thunder, but even their roar was drowned by the rhythmic pounding in his skull. It was not the sound of battle anymore. It was music. Angron's laughter echoed over the Vox. "Do you feel it, my sons? The nails sing for us now." And they did. The Legion had become one vast, throbbing organism of rage. Each warrior's heartbeat synchronized with the next, each chain-axe stroke feeding into the same relentless rhythm. The Emperor's light had no place here. This was a symphony of annihilation. When the massacre ended, the sands of Isstvan were blackened glass. Entire legions had been annihilated. Those who survived crawled away in silence, too broken to speak. The World Eaters left nothing but ruin. Yet even then, the nails did not quiet. The rhythm only grew faster, hungrier. Angron roared into the sky, his voice cracking the Voxnet, demanding another war, another slaughter. Khorne tried to speak to him afterward. He tried to remind his father of who they were, of the brotherhood they once shared. But Angron no longer understood language. Every word was pain, every thought an echo of violence. Khorne realized then that the nails had already won. They had consumed everything. His father's will, the Legion's soul, his own humanity. There would be no redemption, no peace, no end. Only the endless rhythm of fury. Some say it was then that Khorne began to change, that the seed of his later madness was planted in that moment. He started to see the truth that none of his brothers could bear to face, that they were no longer warriors, no longer servants of any cause. They were slaves to the nails, their gods made of static and blood. In his private journals, later found drifting aboard the derelict Conqueror, Khorne wrote a single phrase over and over again: "The silence never comes." That silence would one day fall, but not in mercy, not in forgiveness. It would come in the form of the warp itself, answering the rhythm of the nails with a voice far older, far darker. The Red Angel had opened the door, and something was waiting beyond it. The sky above Isstvan III was a bruised, angry red, as though the planet itself had bled into the void. Smoke spiraled from the bombarded cities, twisting like serpents into the clouds, carrying with it the metallic tang of human blood and promethium. From orbit, the 12 Legion descended in perfect chaos, hulls of warships disgorging thousands of crimson warriors, each one a conduit of rage, each one an echo of their Primarch's fury. The nails sang in concert, driving them faster, harder, further into slaughter. What had once been strategy, command, or honor had become a single, simple truth: kill. Angron strode through the burning streets, a living storm of muscle, metal, and wrath. Every swing of his chain-axe was a note in a symphony of death, each severed limb a chord in the melody that had been composed in his skull long before the Great Crusade began. Around him, the World Eaters moved as one, their eyes glazed, their mouths twisted in manic laughter. Even the loyal sons who had survived previous campaigns whispered that to watch them fight was to witness divinity warped into monstrosity. Worship through violence, the cadence of pain elevated to ritual. And somewhere, deep in the warp, a presence stirred. It was vast, older than the stars, attuned to the rhythm that had always existed in the 12 Legion but had never found a vessel so perfectly tuned. The entity did not step into the material world, did not reveal itself with light or shadow. It waited, patient, a god listening for the right symphony. The screams of the dying, the exhilaration of the killers, the pulse of the nails inside Angron's skull. It drank from all of them. And then, when the crescendo reached its apex, the entity whispered. The whisper was not heard with ears but with blood and bone. It spoke in instinct, in hunger, in the surge of fury that made warriors feel alive beyond all reason. Some of the 12 Legion's warriors felt it and knew nothing of its source. Some trembled at the name they could not pronounce. And Angron, the Red Angel, felt it as a mirror to his own torment, as if the nails themselves had found resonance in a presence older and deeper than even their cursed rhythm. It was Khorne, the blood god, though no mortal name could ever capture the breadth of his appetite. And Isstvan III was the altar, the slaughter, the betrayal, the screams. All were offerings, as natural as breathing to the Red Angel and his sons. In those moments, the World Eaters did not fight for conquest, for empire, or for the Emperor. They fought because to fight was to exist, and the existence of their fury had finally been recognized. The nails pulsed with a rhythm that was no longer entirely mortal. They now carried the resonance of a god's hunger. And yet, amid this transcendence of violence, fragments of Angron's humanity flickered. Sometimes, when a survivor begged for mercy, he froze for the briefest instant, his lips twitching, his mind grappling with a memory he could not name. He recalled Nuceria, the child's laughter, the comrades he had failed, the betrayal of salvation. But the nail's song drowned out these moments, every second of reflection replaced by the need to strike. Each hesitation became agony, each spark of mercy punishment. The Red Angel could not forgive, could not rest, could not love. Only rage remained. Khorne, at his side, saw these fragments too. He saw the brief tilt of Angron's head, the brief catch in his voice, the shadow of a man who had once been more than a weapon. And he feared them, feared what they would become, feared the day when no trace of humanity would remain. But fear had no voice, no will, no power here. Only obedience, and the unending rhythm of the nails, and the whispers that now came not from metal and flesh, but from the warp itself. The galaxy watched in awe and horror as the Red Angel's fury became legend. Isstvan III was merely the beginning. From the ash of betrayal, the World Eaters rose, no longer soldiers of the Imperium, but priests of slaughter. Every drop of blood spilled was a liturgy, every scream, a hymn. And as the 12 Legion marched from world to world, they carried with them not just the nails, but a new faith, one of fury, devotion, and the unquenchable thirst for carnage. Even among the most loyal, whispers began. This was no longer war. It was worship. The butcher's nails had made them killers, but Khorne's gaze had sanctified their madness. And yet, within that devotion, a tragic ember of identity remained, flickering faintly, desperately, in the heart of Angron. A memory of a child, a rebel, a lost son, and the fleeting understanding that he had never truly been free. The stage was set. The galaxy would burn. And the 12 Legion, now more storm than men, more ritual than army, was ready to answer the call. The betrayal unfolded like a blade through the heart of the Imperium. Loyalist legions, marching in disciplined columns across Isstvan V, believed they faced a rebellion easily crushed. But the 12 Legion moved unseen, their fury masked by smoke and shadow, their presence heralded only by the eerie rhythm of the nails vibrating through the metal decks of their drop ships. When they struck, it was not as soldiers. It was as predators. And at their head strode Angron, the Red Angel, laughing with a sound that shook the very air. The echoes of torment carried to every corner of the battlefield. The Loyalists fell as though the galaxy itself had turned against them. The Salamander's flames were snuffed by the sheer ferocity of the charge. The Raven Guard's stealth became nothing but a death trap as the World Eaters descended from above. Bolter fire met chain axe, precision met fury, and fury won every time. Screams rang across the valleys and craters, blending into the unholy chorus that had been waiting for millennia to find form. The blood god had finally claimed a temple, and the altar was soaked in brotherly blood. In the midst of this, Angron moved not as a commander but as a force of nature. His swing cleaved squads in twain, yet his eyes, wild and burning, sometimes lingered on the few who pleaded for mercy. A whisper of remembrance stirred in his mind. Ghosts of Nuceria, the faces of the fallen, the sons he had abandoned. But the nails howled louder than memory, louder than conscience, and the moment passed. Death was a melody. He was its conductor. And Khorne, ever loyal, followed, a mirror of his father's rage, his own humanity corroding with each life ended. The Red Angel's transformation was complete. By the time Horus's rebellion spread across the stars, the 12 Legion had become not merely betrayers of the Emperor, but something far darker. Worshippers of carnage, priests of an unholy divinity who demanded blood in rhythms that no mortal mind could comprehend. Every kill, every scream, every burning world was a sermon. And for Angron, the whispers of the blood god intertwined with the nails, creating a feedback loop of agony and ecstasy that neither he nor his sons could escape. Yet even in this devotion, there were fragments of what had been lost. Sometimes, in the lull between massacres, Angron would stand over the bodies of his enemies and pause. His gaze would sweep the battlefield as though searching for something, someone, a reflection of the man he might have been before the nails claimed him. The soldiers around him whispered, unsure if he mourned the dead or simply sensed the hollow weight of his own existence. Khorne understood. He had seen the spark, a dying ember, barely glowing, in the heart of a monster. It was enough to inspire loyalty, enough to bind him to the Red Angel despite the horrors that flowed in their wake. From the warp, Khorne's presence deepened. The blood god did not speak in words but in instinct and desire. The nails had prepared the Legion. The betrayal had consecrated them. And now, for the first time, the fury of Angron and his sons resonated perfectly with the will of a god. The psychic imprint of every swing of a chain axe, every scream, every shattering of bone was recorded in the warp, woven into a symphony that even the strongest psychers could feel reverberate across the stars. The World Eaters had become instruments of divinity, and the galaxy itself would tremble before the sound of their chorus. Horus did not need to compel them further. The 12 Legions' allegiance had already shifted beyond loyalty, beyond fear. They served the rhythm of pain, the ecstasy of slaughter, the irresistible pull of a force older than the stars themselves. Angron was no longer merely a primarch of the Emperor. He was a priest, a conduit, a herald. His war cry carried not the authority of command, but the resonance of worship. Every battle was a ritual, every death an offering. Yet, even in this, the tragic embers of Angron's past flickered. When the flames of Isstvan burned, when brother fell to brother, he sometimes hesitated, however briefly. A memory of Nuceria, a fleeting image of the gladiators he had loved and lost, pressed against the fire of his fury. And in that pause, almost imperceptible to those around him, he glimpsed the possibility of what might have been, had the nails never taken root, had the Emperor never torn him from the only family he had ever known. But the galaxy waited for no man's regret. War surged onward. The World Eaters moved like a tide of blood across every battlefield Horus claimed, their faith in slaughter absolute, their devotion to fury unbroken. They became the instrument through which the blood god's will was made manifest. A legion transformed by technology, trauma, and the dark whispers of a god. And for all the divinity in their rage, for all the worship that shaped their existence, a single truth remained. Within the Red Angel, the spark of tragic humanity still smoldered, a flicker lost among the roaring storm, awaiting a moment that may never come. The fall at Isstvan was more than betrayal. It was consecration. The 12 Legion had crossed the threshold of mortal understanding. They were no longer soldiers of the Emperor, nor merely victims of circumstance. They were the living embodiment of war, rage, and devotion to the blood god, and the galaxy would never again see them as men. And as the stars themselves bore witness, Angron raised his axes toward the heavens, the nails thrumming in perfect harmony with the whispers of a god, and a new chapter of devastation began. One that would be sung in blood for millennia. In the eye of terror, the stars bleed. Light fractures into impossible hues, and the void pulses as if alive, listening. Time has no meaning here, measured only by the cadence of suffering and the relentless rhythm of war. Angron stands at the center of this living nightmare, a storm incarnate, a god forged from pain, fury, and the countless deaths of worlds. He is no longer merely a primarch. He is something more, and yet something tragically less. A demon primarch, a creature of infinite rage bound to mortal memory. A king in a realm where kings are devoured as quickly as they rise. The nails beat within him still, though now they resonate with the warp's own heartbeat. An echo amplified by the worship and slaughter that have defined his existence. The Red Angel's fury is endless, a tidal force that sweeps through the endless corridors of the Eye, scattering demonic minions and mortal prey alike. Every swing of his twin chain axes tears the fabric of reality, each scream from the dying feeding the ecstasy that drives him forward. Angron is omnipotent here, yet he is prisoner to his own blood-soaked instincts, a throne made of fury and chains. And yet, within that maelstrom of power, fragments of his mortal self flicker. Memories of Nuceria, of the gladiators who had once been his family, of the betrayal that tore him from the only life he had ever known, rise unbidden. He sees faces, fleeting as shadows in the warp, and in each he senses the man he might have been, a primarch of the Emperor's vision rather than a herald of the blood god. But these moments are brief, crushed immediately under the weight of rage and divine hunger. The nails scream louder, the warp answers, and the echoes of lost humanity are swallowed once more. Khorne, now twisted almost beyond recognition by the nails, stands at his father's side, a shadow of loyalty in a sea of madness. He sees the glory, the divinity, and the curse entwined in the Red Angel, and he fears the inevitability of what is to come. Yet he cannot turn away. To leave Angron would be to abandon the rhythm, the terrible song that binds the 12 Legion together. And so he fights, he follows, he worships, knowing that their legacy has become larger than any single man, larger than loyalty, larger than even the Imperium itself. Across the Eye, the whispers of the blood god grow louder, more insistent, threading through the warp like rivers of fire. Every soul that dies in Angron's wake is a hymn, every scream, a liturgy. But the god of skulls does not grant peace. He does not soothe, console, or forgive. He hungers always, and Angron, in his exaltation, has become both vessel and victim, god and prisoner, savior and destroyer. He cannot escape the nails, nor can he escape the hunger that has become his essence. Yet even in this infernal apotheosis, the galaxy remembers the man who was Angron. Among the scattered accounts of loyalists, among the heretical whispers that reach Terra despite the distance of the Eye, there is a narrative of tragedy and inevitability. Was he doomed from the first moment he was ripped from Nuceria? Was the Emperor's act of salvation a kindness or a sentence? These questions have no answers here. The warp does not care for morality, nor does Khorne, nor do the echoes of the dead who follow the Red Angel through eternity. Only the rhythm of fury remains, unbroken, unyielding. The 12 Legion marches still, though their bodies are more demon than flesh. Battlefields become sacred sites. Their red sands an altar to anger, suffering, and unending combat. Mortals who stumble into their wake are instruments of worship, enemies whose deaths are prayers, and those who survive do so by the thinnest of margins, if at all. The nails pulse, the warp groans, and the Red Angel ascends further into a godhood that is as magnificent as it is horrifying. Some of the other traitor legions whisper that Angron's ascension is unique. Even among the gods of the warp, even among the demons and immortal entities of chaos, the Red Angel stands apart. He is not merely servant nor champion. He is both. A being who embodies wrath without restraint, fury without reason, and devotion without love. And in this, there is a sorrow that even Khorne cannot touch, a wound so deep that it manifests not in pain but in absence, the haunting emptiness of a soul never allowed to heal. In this final descent, there is no victory. There is no resolution. There is only the endless cadence of fury, the eternal echo of the nails, and the stark, brutal truth that Angron, the Red Angel, the demon per march, is as much a victim as he is a god. The galaxy burns, the warp roars, and the 12 Legion endures, a testament to both the grandeur and tragedy of war. And somewhere, beneath the storm of rage and the shadow of the blood god, a faint ember flickers, the memory of a man who once was, a son who loved, a warrior who dreamed of freedom. Even in damnation, even in apotheosis, that ember refuses to die. The Red Angel has ascended, and the universe trembles beneath the fury he has become.